Once again, my name is Rachel, and I'm going to be your instructor for today's Introduction to Masking course. So today what we're going to talk about is how masking is used in ProShow Producer. Let me go ahead and shut down this audio test show. So masking inside Producer is going to give you some really unique creations, things that you're not going to be able to reproduce otherwise. You can do very similar sorts of effects by using an image editing software, but being able to do this inside ProShow Producer, you're going to be able to bring your images to life. You're going to be able to conceal and reveal certain portions of your images. So in today's class, what we're going to do is talk about what masks are inside ProShow Producer, and we're going to go through about 3.5 examples of how you can use masking in your own slideshows. So that's what I want to start out with, is showing you how masking looks, some examples of masking in the program. All right, so I'm just going to play through these 4 slides that I have created so that you can see exactly what we're going to be producing today.
Hello? Hello? Yeah, I have an appointment for 9 a.m., right? Okay. Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. So just to go through these nice and slow, just to make sure everybody can see this, because it looks like our connection, people are having a little bit of trouble kind of seeing what's going on the screen. So we'll try and make this go nice and slow. So this first creation, or first example that we're going to create is going to blend 2 images together. And we're going to have some parallax motion, some opposite moving motion, to kind of further enhance the fact that these 2 images are blended together. In the next example, we've got kind of a letterbox shape in the middle of the screen. We see a textured pattern on the top and bottom, and we see inside that letterbox the image is moving. So even though the image is moving, the letterbox is standing still. So we're able to create a unique experience of viewing this image through this sort of letterbox hole. And then the next example, it almost looks like you took an eraser on the background and you're able to see this image of the windmill appearing from behind the background. And then the final image, we've got a nice abstract background. We've got kind of lights showing. And then as we proceed, we see that slowly an image of balloons is revealed. And it's almost like there's kind of a cloud floating over the balloons, kind of revealing them through the abstract background. And masking is what is going to allow us to create all of these examples. So when you're working with masking, how many of you use masking in an image editing software? If you do, raise your hand. Click on that hand icon. Let me know if you're familiar with the masking concept in general. Okay. It looks like about 25%, 30% of you are. Okay, good deal, good deal. We'll go ahead and lower your hands. So for those of you who may not be familiar, a mask is a layer, and it's a layer inside image editing software. It's a layer inside ProShow Producer. It's a layer that allows you to conceal and reveal certain parts of underlying layers. So you can think of it as kind of the way a stencil masks out a certain part of the underlying layers underneath that stencil and allows you to show color through the open part of the stencil. And it's sort of similar, you can think of that as a similar way that a mask works. So inside ProShow Producer, there are 2 kinds of masks, or 2 different kinds of channels. The first is called an intensity or grayscale mask. And the way this works is it's going to channel out underlying layers depending on the light and dark values of the mask. So the easiest way to remember the intensity or grayscale is black conceals, white reveals. In your notes it says dark conceals, light reveals. That works too, but I find it much easier to remember black conceals, white reveals. And that's a little cheesy, but the way I remember it is when I wear black clothing, it makes me look slimmer because it conceals my flaws. Alright, so black is concealing, and you know, if you've ever tried to wear white jeans, they're very revealing. Alright, so that's how I remember it. Dark conceals, white reveals. Okay, so here's how we want to think about this. So if we take a layer, like maybe this, we'll take this port image here, and we'll drag and drop it. So a mask can be any sort of image for a grayscale mask. A lot of times when we use a grayscale mask in the program, we're going to use a gradient because we have a gradient feature inside the program that allows you to add a gradient as a layer really easily. So I'm going to just double click, open up my slide options, and go to my layers category. And we'll just go right over here to the layer settings tab. Now take a look over on the left side of the screen. About midway down, you'll see masking layer. You can use this on-off button right here to make any layer a mask. Or another easy way to add a mask is here in your layers list on the right side underneath your preview window. Click the plus button to add a new layer. And take a look. You can just add an image, a solid color, a gradient, but the easiest way is to go ahead and say, I want to add a masking layer. And basically what that's going to do is just save you a step in having to add, say, a gradient as a layer and then go over to the left side and enable it as a mask. This is going to go ahead and allow you to add that gradient, but it will automatically turn it on as a mask. It's just saving you an extra step. We like to do that here. So we're going to choose to add a gradient. Now, by default, it's going to show up in your gradient list. Look at the presets. Look at masks. And you can change the type if you want. You can make it radial or angular. You can do all sorts of different things. But take a look at what you see here. All of the masks that are included are black and white. And that's for a reason, because when you use a gradient as a masking layer, it's easy to use them as an intensity or grayscale mask. So let's say we want to do like a radial mask. We want to, say, shade the outside corners of this sort of lighthouse port image. So let's think about what we would want to do. We want to conceal the corners, and we want to reveal the center. So if we want to conceal the corners, we would want black on the outside. So maybe something like this mask. And because it's white in the center, it's going to reveal the outside. Now take a look and see that there's kind of a gray area. And you can see in the mask we've got a white color marker, another white color marker. These kind of work in a similar way to your keyframes. But you want to think of them as color markers. So between the white and black color markers here in your color area, you can kind of increase the space to give it more of a gray area. And anywhere where it's gray, because it's part white, part black, it's going to blend together. So you're going to be able to see a little bit, but not a lot. So you're going to start to create kind of an opacity effect. It's going to go from opaque to transparent, sort of. And then in the black area, it's going to conceal it completely. So let's see what happens when we click on this and say OK. You'll see that a gradient is added, and we have and you can see it's applied to our boats. You see that there's a line going over. There's this gradient icon to the left of a masking icon to the left of our gradient layer. And it is connected through this line to our boats layer. Take a look on the left. You'll see that the masking layer for our gradient is enabled and that the mask type is intensity grayscale. We want to leave it like that and say OK. And take a look now how our image has kind of been transformed. It makes it look like we're looking through a telescope at the port in the background. So this is an intensity or grayscale mask. It's going to allow you to use the colors black and white, and it really works with dark and light colors as well to conceal or reveal certain parts of underlying layers. Now, where it can get interesting is if we added another layer behind this Boats 02 image. So let's say we take another layer. Let's see what other layers we've got here. Maybe we could do something as simple as like an abstract background or something like that. So if we take this abstract 02, hold down our control key and add it to slide number 1, well, of course it's going to add as the top layer. But if we go to our slide options, we can take this layer number 1, our abstract layer, and move it down to the bottom using our arrow key. And we can go over to our layer settings and make it fill up the entire frame. Maybe even zoom in just a little bit more. And now take a look. Instead of seeing the black background of the slide, we see that abstract layer, and our abstract layer is kind of blending in with the port image. And the reason is the gradient mask is only attached to layer number 2. It's not attached to the abstract layer. So the black area of the gradient mask is concealing, remember it's hiding, it's making it look slimmer, the boat image, but because it's not applied to the abstract layer, that abstract layer can show through. So you can kind of create really interesting effects by putting different images behind a masked layer. And you can kind of take it a step further by starting to add motion effects, which is what we're going to do in the first example. So this is how an intensity or grayscale mask works. The second kind of mask is an alpha channel mask. And an alpha channel mask doesn't care what color you have. It doesn't care about light values, dark values. All it cares about is pixels. So anywhere where there is a pixel, it will show the layer underneath. So alpha masks, alpha channel masks, work really well with images that either have a kind of a transparent background, or you can use kind of solid shapes really easily. So let's take, for example, let's try the same boats layer again, and let's see what we can do with an alpha mask. So let's double click, open up our slide options, and again, like I said, you can use any image as a alpha mask. What you'll tend to notice here in these classes is that when we want to create an alpha mask, we're going to use a solid color as a mask. You'll also notice that when we do these, we tend to add a solid red color as a mask. Now, there's no specific reason for this except that red in your layers list is really easy to point out, and it's really easy to see that that is a mask. And for the most part, there's not going to be a whole lot of occasions where you're going to need to have a red solid color layer in your slideshow. Maybe black, maybe white, maybe yellow to create like a glow or something like that, but I would say that red is pretty rare. So that's kind of why we chose red. It sticks out. It's really easy to see. So let's do that. Let's click the plus button, choose to add a masking layer, and make it a solid color. And again, I'm going to change the color to red. You don't have to do this, but you'll notice that we tend to do it in our classes. Change it to red and say OK. Now take a look on the left side on where it says masking layer. You'll see the mask type is intensity grayscale. We want to click on that drop-down menu and choose alpha transparency. Now if I click OK, everything looks the same. Nothing is masked, nothing looks different, and that is because my solid color layer is taking up the entire preview window. Well, let's take a look at what happens if I change the zoom value under layer settings to 50% and then click OK. Now you'll see that the only part of the lighthouse, that port image that I see, is what is underneath that mask. So it matters where the pixels of the mask are. So what you can do is you can either move the mask, you can move the layer that is being masked, either way. You can make changes to your masking layer, say like add a vignette, which is what we're going to do later, to kind of give that mask a feathered edge. But anywhere where that mask layer is, that's where you're going to be able to see the layers underneath. So if we took this mask layer and only showed it right over where the lighthouse is, and maybe we even rotated it so that it's only the lighthouse. I guess it's the shift key. There we go. So we put it right over the lighthouse, maybe make it smaller so that we only see the lighthouse. And then I can click OK, or I can just click on the boats layer. And then we can see that now it looks like we've only got the lighthouse image. It's not an entire port image, it's just a lighthouse. So you can play with alpha masks this way. Alpha masks are really good for making sure that your image fits into a certain perimeter. And so, you know, when you're using things like maybe trying to get images to fit behind a shape that isn't the image's natural shape, you can use a mask to make sure that, you know, your image can be larger than the mask, but it's only going to show through where the mask is located. And again, if we wanted to, we could remove that solid color layer and we could add any sort of image. We could do, let's take a look at what these images are. We could do a balloon. And I can take that balloon layer, go over to the left, and enable it as a masking layer. And I just need to change it to alpha transparency and take a look. I'm holding down my shift key so that I go in 45-degree increments in my rotation. And look, I've got the exact same effect, and I've got a boat's image as my mask. And the only reason we don't tend to use a regular old image as an alpha mask is that here in your layers list it looks a little confusing. Sure, it shows that it's a mask. The mask icon is to the left of it, but you can still see the balloons here in the list. So, but this is just to show you that any image can work as a masking layer. Debbie, I see that your hand is raised. If you want to ask a question, go for it. Debbie asks, where are you using the balloons? I'm using the balloons as a masking layer, as an alpha mask. And I put the balloons there to show you that when you're working with an alpha mask, it doesn't matter what image you use, because it only works with pixels. You'll notice that the balloons has just been turned into, like, it looks just white here in the preview window, and that's because it's an alpha mask. So it only matters where you have a pixel. When we do alpha masks here in the classes, you'll notice that we're going to use, for the most part, solid colors. And that's going to help to prevent any of the confusion that clearly I have caused now, I apologize, by using an image as a masking layer, at least when you're working with alpha masks. Hope that helps, Debbie. I think it'll become clearer when we start going in and creating our actual examples that are included in the notes. So let's get started on those. Let's see some real practical examples and not just these kind of made-up lighthouse examples. For the first example, we're going to use a gradient mask to blend two images together. And, this is a really good way to display two images at once and make it look polished and professional. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this image Nature 01 and Nature 03. So I'm using my control key to select both of those, and I'm going to drag and drop them into slide number 1. I'm going to increase my slide time just a little bit so we have a little bit more time to work with, and maybe change my transition time to be a little bit shorter. Let's double click on our slide to open up our slide options. We're going to start out in the Layers category in the Layer Settings tab. I'm going to take my layer number 1, which is my pink flower, and I'm just going to drag it over to the right a little bit. I'm going to increase my zoom value to, say, 120%. We'll make it nice and large. Just take it over to the right, like so. We only really want to show off kind of what I think is sort of the pretty part of the flower. And then we're going to take this other image, Nature 01, drag it over to the left. Let's increase our zoom value to 140%. Let's make it nice and large. We want to make sure we see the leaves. So we want to be able to show these two images, but take a look at what it looks like. As is, it doesn't look very good. We can see the hard edge of this flower picture, and it's covering up the leaves underneath. So, we could always go in and we could crop the flower, but we're still going to see the edge of the image. And you'll notice that in this class, one of the benefits of using masks is that you never have to see the hard edge of an image or video or whatever. You're able to conceal the fact that the image ever ends. It's kind of one of my pet peeves about watching slideshows, is being able to see the edge of an image. So masks are a really good way to conceal that, to make it look like your image is sort of infinite. Alright, looks like you guys are having a hard time viewing my screen. Let's see. Not quite sure why that is. Okay, now we're back. Alright, so what I want to do is apply a mask so that we can sort of blend these two images together. We can see a good portion of both of the images, but no hard edges of the image. So let's go into our slide options, into our layer settings tab. Let's click the plus button and let's add a masking layer, and let's do a gradient. Alright, so let's take a look. Move this gradient down a little bit. We've got our pink flower on the right. We've got our green leaves on the left. So we need to pick which gradient is going to do what we want. We obviously want a black and white gradient. So we want one that's going to sort of blend the two images together, but we're still going to see the two of them very distinctly. So this mask that I have selected right now has a little bit too much gray in it. And most likely we're still going to be able to see the edge of the flower because there's so much gray. So I'm thinking maybe this mask would be good. Or actually the fourth mask over I think is going to be even better. So remember, black conceals. So we're going to be applying this mask to the flower. Let me make sure that that is the case. You want to make sure you've got your flower selected here. Because right now it was going to apply to the nature image, which is not what we want. We're going to apply it to the flower. So make sure you click on the flower. And now we'll say add masking layer. So that fourth mask over, we want to conceal the left side, reveal the right side, and then we've got a nice large gray area. We can adjust the size of that gray area by adjusting these color stays. And you can always do that later if you want as well. We can also go down towards the bottom underneath where it says gradient settings and adjust the positioning of our gradient. So if we don't want that angle, we can take it over to the right closer to 360 and make it a little bit more up and down. So it looks like our colors are on the correct place. Black is on the left, we want to conceal the left side of the flower. So I think this looks good. Let's go ahead and click OK. Now let's click OK and see what it looks like. Now we're able to see both of the images. They're blended together, but we still see the most exciting part of each one. So now what we want to do, I think this looks nice as it is, but we can take it a step further, go into our effects category, go into our motion effects, and we can kind of switch the zoom values. So our flower starts out at 120%, our green leaves start at 140. So how about we take the flower and in the ending position, change the zoom value to 140%. And you can adjust where it's located in the ending position if you want. And then we take our green leaves and in the ending position, change it to 120%. And we're going to need to move that over so that we don't see the edge of the image. And now if we click OK and play through, we get a really nice effect. We've got our green leaves zooming out, our pink flower zooming in, and that's that parallax motion. If any of you are familiar with, I think they use it in gaming quite a bit, but it's a good way to add depth to a slide by creating that contrasting motion. It's used in video games quite a bit. So by taking that gradient, adding that little bit of motion, you create an even more unique effect. All right, so this is a really good example of how you can use grayscale masking with a gradient. All right, so everybody feeling good about that? If you feel good about that example, click the hand icon. Let me know that you understand what we're doing. Just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. All right, I've only got about half of you that said you were doing good. Okay, well that's all right. We can do it again if we need to towards the end. Okay, so we've got our grayscale mask. All you need to remember when you're working with grayscale masks, black conceals, white reveals. So with your mask, anything that's black is going to cover up the layer underneath. Anything that's white, so here in our layers category, when we look at our mask is applied to the pink flower. So everywhere where the mask is black, the flower is concealed. Anywhere where the mask is white, our flower is revealed. And when you see that gray area, that is how we are blending our flower with the underlying layer to create this final look. So we've got, if we were looking at the mask, it's black on the left side, white on the right side, and gray in the middle. So the white side is where we see the flower, black side is where we see the underlying layer, which is the green leaves. And then where it's gray, it kind of blends the two together. All right, so let's move on to our next kind of mask, which is an alpha mask letterbox. So letterbox, Sandra asked, can I preview how the mask looks before clicking done? I can. Sure. I can hit the play button to show you the preview. So we've got our gradient, which is applied to our pink flower. So our pink flower is covered up because it's applied the mask has been applied to the pink flower. Anywhere where it's black, the pink flower is covered up. And then anywhere where it's black, because the pink flower is concealed, that allows us to see the layer underneath. So what I'm doing is I'm clicking on the different layers to show you what they look like. And Kate asked, can you change the gradient after it is applied? Absolutely. So if we don't like the way the gradient looks, we can always right-click on it. We can click on Edit Layer, and then click on Gradient Options. And we can go in and change the way these color stays look if we want. So we can make the gray area larger, or we can apply a whole different gradient if we want. So let's see what happens if we make the gray area larger. So everything looks the same when we click on the gradient layer. What we're going to see the difference is when we click on the flower layer. So now you can see we see a little bit more of the flower, a little bit more is blended in with the layer underneath, because there's more of a gray area. The completely black area, which will conceal the flower, is smaller. So now when we look at the nature image, we're actually going to have to hit play to see what it looks like. So now you see that it's blended a little bit more. The blending area is larger because we have more gray. Remember, gray, because we're seeing a little bit of black, a little bit of white, it's concealing a little, revealing a little. So you can always change your gradient by right-clicking on it, choosing Edit Layer, and going to Gradient Options. And that's your gradient layer. Sherry asked if a grayscale mask always uses 3 or more layers. You always need at least 1 layer besides the mask. So you don't have to have 3. If we were to take this layer off, Alexandra asked how would it look without the 3rd layer, the leaves. I can preview that by simply clicking this checkbox next to 3. That's just going to hide that layer. So this is what it would look like. Because we're just seeing the black background. Our default background color is black. So it's concealing the flower, so all we can see is the background. Does that make sense? So we can enable that leaves layer again. And you can see that now we've got that kind of blended image. So even though when we click on our flower, we can see that yellow line that shows us where the edge of the layer is. Because we've applied a mask, we're concealing the edge of the layer. We're hiding that the edge of the layer even exists. So Sherry, a grayscale mask doesn't have to use 3 or more layers. You need at least 1 layer to apply a mask. Otherwise, you don't need a mask because you don't have any layers. So we need to have the pink flower. We need to have a gradient if you want to apply a mask. You don't have to have the nature image underneath, but the benefit, I think that maybe I've missed the point in telling you guys, the benefit is that you can blend these images together. You're able to create this nice blended look. So let's move on to our second example, and if we're still not quite clear on the gradient mask, during a question and answer session I can do the example a couple more times. I want to make sure we get to all of the other examples that we have to go over. So again, in the second example, we're going to be creating a alpha mask letterbox. So we're going to actually be kind of breaking the constraints. We're going to be skewing a layer so that we can create that letterbox shape, that sort of, long and short shape. So to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to start out with an image. We're going to start out with this image of the trees and a mountain. Landscape mountains underscore O2. I'm going to drag and drop that into slide number 2. Now, what part of this effect is that we're going to use a textured background. So instead of seeing this black on the left and right, we're going to change it to where we see an actual texture. So I'm going to double click, open up my slide options. We're going to go over to the slide category and we're going to work here in the background tab. Underneath background type, we're going to override the show background for this slide and we're going to use an image. We're going to hit the select button to choose an image file. And I've got my images folder stored on my desktop in the Online Classes Toolkit. I've got it, images. And we're going to be using the image Texture Weave O2. It's the very last image in your toolkit. Click open. Now by default, this texture weave is actually the exact same size as this landscape mountain, so we can't see it right now. So you're going to want to go to the bottom left where it says Editing Tools. And you're going to change the scaling. Instead of fit to frame, where all of the image fits inside the frame, we want to make sure it fills up the frame. So we're going to change it to Fill Frame. Now, to the right and left of our mountains image, we can see that textured background. We're just kind of zooming in on the layer a little bit, changing the scaling so that it fills up the entire preview area. Okay, so now that we have that done, we're going to go and do the exact same thing in our layers category to our landscape mountains image. I want it to fill up the entire frame. And we're going to create the letterbox so that we can see this texture weave image, or our texture weave background, on the top and bottom of the mountains. So first we need to change the scaling. Take your mountains layer, over where it says scaling, change it to fill frame. We want to just have it zoom in just a little bit. Change that scaling. Now we want to add our alpha mask. So I'm going to click the plus button in my layers list. I'm going to choose to add a masking layer. And it's going to be a solid color. Now remember at the beginning of class I said that when we do alpha masks, we tend to choose solid colors and we tend to choose turn the color red. And that makes it easily identifiable in our layers list. Anytime you see a red layer when you're in one of our classes, you know that it's going to be an alpha mask. So change the color. I'm going to hit set, change it to that bright, crazy looking red, hit set color, and we'll say OK. Now you'll notice on the left side, underneath masking layer, I need to change my mask type to alpha transparency. When it's set to grayscale, let me click OK just to show you what it looks like. You'll see because red is kind of somewhere in between dark and light, it only kind of reveals the layer underneath. So while this is somewhat interesting to look at, it's not exactly the effect we're going for. So back in our slide options, underneath masking layer, we want to change it to alpha transparency. Now right now, if I click OK, you'll see that my mask is taking up the entire screen, so we see the entire mountains image. So we want to change the shape of our alpha mask to change the way this looks. So we're going to turn our alpha mask into that letterbox shape. So let's do that. To do that, we're going to have to break the constraints. We're going to have to skew the layer, and we can do that in our effects category in the motion effects tab. What we're going to do is break the constraints. See where I'm highlighting? In the starting and ending position. You'll notice that when you set the zoom value, you can set zoom X and zoom Y. when you click this chain link icon to the right, that's going to break the constraint so that you can change the zoom X and Y values independently. You can skew your layer. So let's click on the chain link icon in the starting position. You'll notice that it breaks. It separates. Let me click on it again, and it's back together. If I were to go right now and change my zoom Y value, remember X goes across the screen, Y is up and down. We want to reduce the Y value. We don't want it to be as tall. So if I were to change the Y value while the constraints are still together, if I change it to 50%, it's going to change the zoom X value as well. So let me reset both of those back to 100%. I just hit the reset arrow. Now I'm going to break the constraints of my zoom X and zoom Y. And I'm going to change my zoom Y value to 50. And now we have that letterbox shape. So we want the letterbox to stay the same size and shape. We could go on the ending position, click on the chain link icon, and then change the Y, which is definitely not difficult. But to save ourselves a few clicks, we can go to the left side underneath keyframes, third button down, and that's the copy button. So I'm going to click on that and choose copy start to end. That's going to copy the starting position to the ending position. And now you'll notice it looks exactly the same. So now let me click OK. Let's take a look at what this looks like. Now we have that letterbox shape. We can see the texture on top. We can see the texture on bottom. That's what we were going for. So what's cool now is we can add some motion here in our motion effects, and we can do that to our mountains image. So what I can do in the starting position, I can take my layer and zoom in to where we only see the trees. Now I want you to take a look in the starting position out at the mountains layer. You can see the yellow outline that's telling me where the edge of the image is. Without the mask, you would be able to see the edge of my image. It just wouldn't look quite as polished. We wouldn't be able to zoom in on the trees and make it look like the image is only of the trees. We would be able to see the edge of our image. And then in the ending position, let's take it down to where we can see only the mountaintop. Now you could create this effect without the alpha mask. It's just not going to look quite as polished because with the alpha mask it makes it look, you know, like a video pan. Without the alpha mask, it's going to look like you've got an image and you're moving it down on the screen. It's just, it gives it a little bit more of a polished look. Maybe I'll zoom in just a little bit on the mountains like so. So let's click OK, or actually let's just scrub through our keyframe timeline and take a look at what this looks like exactly. We've got our trees, and then we slowly start to reveal the mountain in the background as our slide fades out. So it's a very simple way to take an image, to take, say, this image, which is a very nice image, but you can turn it into sort of a panoramic image. You can make it grander than it really is. Everybody feel good about the alpha mask example? If you're feeling good, raise your hand. If you understand what we did. Awesome. We hit above the 50% mark. I like it. Fantastic. Okay, go ahead and lower your hands down. Awesome. Okay, so alpha masks, very good for creating that. You can create your own borders. Alright, so we're going to use alpha masks again. Before we move on to that final example, what I want to do is talk to you about vignettes. Vignettes kind of allow you to add if you're familiar with vignettes, it allows you to add kind of a feathered border to your image. But we can use vignettes with our masks to create really interesting effects. So just to show you kind of how we can make a vignette kind of look like a mask, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this image of a windmill, and I'm going to drag and drop it into slide number 3. Now you'll notice that my background was carried over from slide number 2, and that's fine. I think it's going to work out really well for this particular example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and double click on my slide to open up my slide options. We're going to go over to our layers category, and we're going to go to the editing tab. So take a look on the left side of your slide options underneath editing tools. Third option down is vignette. I'm going to click the enable button. I'm going to enable that vignette option. Take a look at our image. You can already kind of see, at least in the before and after on the lower right hand side, how it's given it kind of a feathered edge. We can edit that even further by clicking on the vignette button. So you can see that it's making it sort of transparent around the outside, because we can see that transparent representation with that checkered background. You can change your vignette to various shapes. You can either do a rounded rectangle or an ellipse. The ellipse may look a little bit more familiar to you. You can also change your vignette size. We can make it larger. We can make it all the way up to 100% to have a very cloud, ghostly look. We can change our border size, how far in the vignette goes. We can change our corner size. We can start to round those corners. When you get to 100%, you pretty much get to an ellipse shape. Right, so we can completely configure our vignette to look however we like. I think that looks really nice. It has a nice sort of soft look to it. So I'm going to go ahead and just click OK. You can adjust this however you want, make it look however you'd like. So I like to use vignettes like this, especially when you have a textured background, because I think what it makes it look like is like you took an eraser and kind of just started erasing the background, and all of a sudden there's this blue sky and a windmill that is revealed. And you can kind of further enhance this look if you want by giving it kind of a vintage sepia tone. And we can do that by enabling the colorize option, which, the black and white is pretty cool, but if we hit set to set the color and then we use the eyedropper tool, we can sample a color from our texture. So I'm just going to hover my eyedropper over the texture, select something, and now it further looks like the windmill belongs there, and it sort of blends in with the background. It's almost like we were creating a mask. So it's kind of as your notes call it, a quick mask. And so if I click OK, I think that this looks really nice. Your notes kind of take it a step further and have you open up your slide options and enable an outline, which kind of further defines the image. But I don't really like the outline, but that's totally up to you. So this is how you can create your own sort of quick mask. So we're going to take this concept of a vignette that we just did, and we're going to apply it to a mask here in this final example. So the final example, whereas in the first two examples we moved our images that were being masked, in this final example, instead of moving the images, we're going to move the mask. So for this example, we're going to use this abstract image, the kind of blurry lights, and we're going to use Balloons 03. So select both of those in your file list and drag and drop them into slide number 4. Let's go ahead and change our slide time. Let's make it a nice 10-second long slide time. Let's double click on our slide to open up our slide options, and let's go over to our layer settings and configure our layers a little bit. You'll notice that that texture weave background has carried over, and it's not going to really be a factor in this slide, so we can leave it. But if it's distracting, you're more than welcome to go into your slide category and remove that background. Alright, so we need to adjust our layers. We want to make sure that Abstract 03 is layer number 2, and your balloons layer is layer number 1. So we're going to take layer number 1 and let's zoom in a little bit. Let's make it 120%. And let's take our abstract layer. Let's make sure that it fills up the entire background. That's all we really need to do. So on the left side, just change it to fill frame. You don't want any of the background showing through on the right or left. Okay, so now that we've done that, make sure your balloons layer is selected, and we want to add our masking layer. So we're going to click the plus button, choose to add a masking layer, and once again we're going to do a solid color. We're going to work with an alpha mask. Remember, alpha masks work with pixels. So anywhere where there's a pixel underneath, that's where the layer underneath is revealed. So for the color, we're going to choose red. Our alpha masks are synonymous with red in the ProShow classes. We'll click OK. Take a look on the left side. Make sure that your mask type is set to alpha transparency. Once again, our mask is taking up the entire screen, so we're able to see the balloons underneath. We want to adjust the size and shape of our mask, because by adjusting the size and shape, we're going to be changing around where the pixels are located. So wherever there are pixels, that's where we see the layer underneath. If there are no pixels, we're going to be able to see less of the layer underneath. So let's go over to our editing tab. Make sure your mask layer, your red layer, is still selected. Go over to the left side underneath Editing Tools and enable the Vignette option. Already, just by that short enable, let me see if I can move my slide options window over so you can see just kind of a little peek. You can see in the main preview window that it already looks a little different. We can start to see a glimpse of the abstract background behind it. Okay, let's click the Vignette button to further edit the way our red layer looks. What we're going to do is we're just going to change the vignette size to 100%. And that's going to give it that nice kind of cloudy blur look. Leave the shape as rounded rectangle, leave the type as transparent, because that's going to mean anywhere that where the vignette is applied, it's going to become transparent. You'll notice as well that there is kind of an area here where it's semi-transparent. And that's exactly what we want. So go ahead and click OK. Now take a look. Let's click OK again so we can see the main preview window. Take a look at how that looks. It already looks pretty neat. It looks like there's just kind of a cloud floating over the abstract background. Or it looks kind of like very similar to this image where it looks like we took the eraser and kind of rubbed it out. Now, what we could have done at this point, right now, what we could have done is simply applied a vignette to the balloon layer. But what's going to make it more special is that we're going to move that mask around. So at this point, there was no need for the mask. We could have just applied a vignette to the balloons. Because all we're doing is kind of concealing everything staying still. But this is why the mask layer is going to be beneficial, because we're going to move it around. I'm going to click on the Effects category. Go to your Motion Effects tab. Make sure your solid color, your red layer, is selected in your layers list. In the starting position, click on your layer and drag it over to the left. Just go ahead and drag it all the way off the screen. In the ending position, drag it off to the right. all the way off the screen. So we're panning our layer across the screen. Scrub through. See what it looks like. Our layer's coming into view, or our slide, excuse me, that transitions in. Aha! And we're slowly revealing the balloons underneath. And that is why you couldn't just apply a vignette to the balloons, because the balloons are staying still. The abstract background is staying still. It's like we're sort of taking a flashlight and just slowly revealing what's going on underneath. All right, you want to see kind of larger what that looks like? I can play it through nice and slow. Now, what's cool is you can take these examples that we've done and you can easily apply them other places. I think this letterbox shape is really cool to use in a lot of slideshows. And if you take a look at a lot of the example shows that Photodex created, a lot of the demo shows, we use this Alpha Mask letterbox feature quite a bit. And in the advanced class, we get in to start layering things on top of the Alpha Mask. You can start to create interesting effects. And in this effect, this final effect with the floating Alpha Mask, you can get in there and start changing up the motion path of your Alpha Mask. You can use keyframing to make it a bit more complex. Or you can go into your layers category and you can change up the shape of your vignette. So let's see what happens when we change it from a rounded rectangle to an ellipse. Now we're revealing even less of the layer underneath, but it still creates a really interesting effect. The preview area, the things that we're seeing underneath, is just a little bit smaller. And you know, I know a lot of people, a lot of things that you can do with these Alpha Masks. You can create unique effects by maybe even, instead of having the excuse me, instead of having the abstract background, say perhaps you have a duplicated layer of the balloons. So you have the exact same image, the balloons, on there twice. But say you take the masked layer, this balloons layer, and you change the hue. So what it'll look like is, just in this kind of random place, the balloons change hue over the course of the slide. So think about how you can start to combine your layers, use masks to create unique effects. Alright, so hopefully now you guys feel more confident about using masks inside ProShow. So today what we discussed is, what is a mask? And remember, a mask allows you to conceal or reveal certain parts of underlying layers. And remember, there are two different channels. You've got intensity grayscale, which works with the light and dark values. So remember, black conceals, black is slimming, it's concealing, and white reveals. Then you've also got the alpha channel. So with alpha channel, a pixel is going to reveal. Where there is no pixel, the layer underneath will be concealed. So it's all about pixels with alpha channel masking. Intensity grayscale works with colors. Alpha works with pixels. So keep that in mind. Work through these examples. Take a look at some of our slideshows. Take a look at the masking slideshow, the feature focus slideshow, and use that to get some ideas. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor to questions from you guys. So feel free to send along any questions. We've already got a few queued up here, and I am going to go through those, and then we will I'll answer them as they come in. All right, so first question from Sandra. Oh, these come in a weird order. Let me ask. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to order them in the order that they were received. So first question was actually from Debbie. Debbie said, can you show an example of using a caption with a layer showing a picture within the letter? Yes, and that is actually not masking. If I click on slide 5, right-click, choose Insert, Title Slide. That's just going to take me right into my captions category here in the slide options. I can do something like type the word text. And I'm going to make this just a little bit smaller. Like so. And what you do with that is on the left side, towards the bottom, it says Use Texture on Caption. Enable that option. And you'll see by default it goes to gradient. So you can use a gradient as a texture on your caption, but you can also use an image. You'll have to click the Browse button to select an image file. And then we could do something like maybe this abstract image. Like so. And you can change the scaling of all of that, and a lot of that is covered in depth in our advanced caption course. But that's just kind of a brief overview of that for you. So, cool. Sandra asked, can you use a video of clouds as a mask? Sure, you could. I do have that clouds video. Let's see how that would work. So, the only problem, well, yeah, you could. You could turn it into, say, like a grayscale. The problem is it would probably need to be black and white, but maybe we could make some adjustments to it. So let's take our picture of balloons, and somewhere, I think in my miscellaneous folder, I've got a clouds video. So I'm going to hold down my control key and add that clouds video to slide number 6. You guys should have that clouds video in your folder as well. I'm not sure how well it's going to work since the sky is blue and not quite dark, you know what I mean? So it really needs to be dark to work the best. It's going to take a minute for that to import since I've got a lot going on here in the machine. 60%. Okay, let's double click on our slide to open up our slide options. We have to go over to our layers category. And you know what I'm actually going to do? It's actually go into my slide category and turn off that textured background. So I'm just going to click on that override show background. Just remove that and we'll go back to a black background. Now I'll go to my layers category. We have to go to our layer settings tab. I'm going to take my balloons layer. I'm going to change the scaling to fill frame so that we don't see any of that background. Alright, so now select your video clouds layer, enable as a masking layer, and you want it to probably be an intensity grayscale mask. Well, it has to be an intensity grayscale mask. It can't be alpha because it matters where pixels are. So we're going to make it intensity grayscale and click OK. And see, it only sort of kind of works. The white area is revealing, the dark area is concealing, but since the dark area isn't that dark, you're able to see quite a bit of the background and still see quite a bit of the image as well. And the white area isn't quite wide enough to see the image completely. So if you had, say, a really black and white video, or maybe if we go over into our editing tab and colorize our layer, maybe that would work. If we colorized it and maybe increase the contrast, Maybe that would help a little bit. It seems to help a bit. So it creates kind of an interesting effect. You could kind of play with it. Some of our media source titles come with video masks that you can use. So if you use any of those media source titles, the royalty-free content, those have videos. Okay, Sandra asked, can you put a video of clouds behind the balloons? Sure, yeah. Let me go ahead and delete that layer since it's kind of large. If we wanted, instead of the abstract image, I could remove that and add an image or video. And we'll choose miscellaneous clouds. And again, it'll take a minute to add and import that. And you'll see it added underneath my mask. So I'm going to want to take that down. And I'm going to use my arrows to remove that as one of the mask layers. So you'll see we're at about 40% importing the video. It'll take just a minute to get all of that imported, all of those changes made. There we go. Okay, now take a look. So instead of the abstract border, we're using the cloud. So it creates an interesting effect as well. All right, Alexandra said, there is a nice saying for grayscale. Black conceals, light reveals. Is there a similar for alpha? And pixels. It's all about pixels. Where there's a pixel, it will reveal. Where there's no pixel, there's no revealing. Unfortunately, I don't have a good saying for that. But if you come up with one, let me know. Just remember, alpha works with pixels. Anywhere there's a pixel, that's where you can see underneath. Sherry said, if I wanted to move a picture under a frame, the best mask would be an alpha transparency. Absolutely. Alpha transparency works very well for that. Or you could use something like this border image where you've got a transparent center and black around the outside, and that's going to create kind of a frame effect too, Sherry. But we use alpha masks quite a bit for moving a picture under a frame because it allows you to change the shape of the picture without actually changing the shape. And you can move the image without ever being able to see the edge of the image. So I think you're right on track, Sherry, of understanding how you can use alpha masks. Sandra asks, are transition effects masks? Transition effects are just transition effects. They create very similar effects, sort of, as masks, but what transition effects do are move you from one slide to another. So it doesn't exactly create a mask because with masks you're working inside one slide, whereas transition effects are moving you from one slide to another. So you're not able to focus on a particular subject matter because you are transitioning away from one subject into another. So not quite. Not quite. Okay, Debbie said, oh, cool, good. Debbie said that was easy. Okay, and Carol and Kroll asked, could you go over the steps of slide 4 again? Sure, no problem. Let me delete some of these slides I've got here. So we can delete slide number 4. So you've got your images. We're going to take our abstract layer and we're going to take our balloons layer. I use my control key to select both of those. We're going to drag and drop them both into slide number 4. Double click to open up your slide options and go over to your layer settings. Alright, we want to change our balloon layer. I'm going to change the setting to fill frame. And then we'll take our abstract layer and change the scaling to fill frame as well. We just want to make sure both of the images fill up the entire preview area. Abstract is layer number 2. Your balloons are layer number 1. Now we want to add our mask, because what we want it to look like is the balloons are just kind of appearing out of this abstract image. So make sure your balloons layer is selected. Click the plus button. Choose Add Masking Layer. We're going to choose Add Solid Color. We're going to change the solid color to red, since we tend to use red for our alpha masks, and say OK. Now take a look on the left side. Make sure that your mask type is set to alpha transparency. Because right now our alpha mask is taking up the entire screen, we're not able to create that effect of making the balloons seem to appear out of the abstract layer. So let's create that. Let's go over to our editing tab. Make sure your mask layer is selected, your red layer. You're going to enable the vignette option and then click the vignette button to customize your vignette. Change your vignette size to 100%. So now you see your mask, or your mask layer, this red layer, has gone from completely opaque and taking up the entire preview window. So this is what it looked like, 0%, completely opaque, taking up the entire window. Change the vignette, and we've started to make it transparent. Where it's transparent, that means there is no pixel. So we're making the transparent area even larger. And you'll see that where it's kind of a pinkish color and it's sort of showing the transparent background, that means it's semi-transparent. There's only partial pixels. Okay? So that's going to give us that nice feathered look. So anywhere where it's dark, opaque red, that's where the layer underneath will be revealed because there is a pixel there. Where it's kind of a pink and it's semi-transparent, it's going to semi-show the layer underneath. And around the outside where there is no pixel, where right now you see the checkered background, anywhere where you see checkered background, that means it's transparent, which means there is no pixel there. And so since there is no pixel, we are not going to be able to see the layer underneath. So click OK. And then go over to your effects category. And now we're going to add some motion. So we're going to take our solid color layer, move it all the way to the left, all the way off the screen. Take your other solid color layer, move it all the way to, the same solid color layer in the ending position and move it all the way to the right. And then click OK. And I didn't change my slide time, but that's okay. We can see it nice and quick. So now when we hit play, it slowly reveals the background layer as the mask moves across the screen. So as the pixels in that mask move across the screen, wherever those pixels are located, that's where we can see underneath. It's almost like an X-ray machine. You know, anywhere where those X-rays go, that's where you can see the layers underneath. Hope that makes sense. Anne. I almost called you Carol. Sorry, Anne. Okay, Alexandra, is there a general rule where to use alpha and where to use grayscale? If you want to do this, use alpha. If you want to do that, use grayscale. I think it's whatever works best in your situation. If you're wanting to blend images together, grayscale's great. If you're wanting to create kind of a textured background, there's quite a few masks that are included with the program. So if you double-click on media sources and double-click on producer built-in content, you'll see that there are some masks that are included. So this is a grayscale mask, and really what this allows you to do is create kind of a textured background. you're not going to be able to necessarily reveal images that well doing this, but it creates a really neat texture, as does this one. This is a good black and white texture look. I think most of these images are grayscale masks. What I tend to use alpha masks for, on the other hand, is creating stuff like this, where you want to create this kind of letterbox shape, where you want to move an image, but you don't want to move the window that the image is shown in. So if you want a static frame, and I'm using frame very loosely here, if you want a static window, but you want to move the image, an alpha mask is really good. So hopefully that helps, Alexandra. Sherry, maybe to advance for this class, in flying in pair style where two sets of portrait pictures spin in, I would like to outline pictures. It appears the masks that control the size of the image prevent that. I tried increasing or decreasing the size of the mask, but I still can't see the outline suggestions. I'm not quite sure about that, Sherry. I think when you're wanting to apply that style, you may be stuck with the way that looks. I'm not completely familiar. I'm guessing you need two images to do flying in pairs. I can take a look real quick, but we do have quite a few other questions, so I want to make sure I get to those. You may want to check in the slide styles class. Did I already pass it? Flying in pairs. Oh, you need 4 images. Let me see. Yeah. I think the masks are going to prevent that from happening. But you could probably create your own style that is very similar to that would allow you to add outlines. So, good question, Sherry. It's a little bit much for me to get into right now, just since we have so many other questions to go over. So, check back if you want with a slide styles class. I'm not sure if there's one scheduled, but hopefully we'll be able to get the new schedule for February up very soon. Okay, Sandra, what is mask depth in the layer settings? So, mask depth means how many layers that mask applies to. So underneath your layers category in layer settings, you can change the mask depth underneath masking layers. So if I change my mask depth to 2, take a look at my layers list. Now that mask encompasses both of my layers. You see how layer 3 moved over to the right? And not 21, just 2. So now this solid mask layer applies to both the balloons and the abstract layer. So it's going to completely change the way our slide looks. So now, in theory it will. There we go. Okay, so now, after all of that has been applied, now you'll see we don't see the abstract layer at all. All we see is that background that carried over. So you can apply it to multiple layers, and where that gets to be good is if there's various things that you can do with that. So you can change how many layers it applies to. And you can also do that here in your layers list by using these right and left arrows. Taking it to the right will move it into the mask. Taking it to the left will move it out of the mask. All right, Alexandra, when I'll start to understand alpha, pixels are like burning a hole through a layer, then grayscale will put it on the head. It seems to me that they are opposite of each other, and I'm confused again. They're 2 different types of masks. And they work in they work in completely opposite ways. They can work completely different. Alphas work with pixels. A grayscale mask works with light and dark values. So they are completely separate. They both work as a mask. They allow you to conceal or reveal certain parts of underlying layers, but they work in completely different ways. There are two different channels of masks. So I feel like you do quite you've got the right idea, Alexandra. And actually pixels aren't like burning a hole through the layer. Pixels allow you to see the layer underneath. So they don't actually remove anything. The pixels allow you to see what's underneath. They allow you to reveal, but where there's not a pixel, it's going to cover up the layer underneath. So you can think of an alpha layer where pixels are like the white, and where there is no pixels, it's like black in grayscale masking. So no pixel is to black as pixel is to white. Using my SAT comparison there. Or you can say black is to white as no pixel is to pixel. I think that's the correct SAT version of it. Sandra, would you create the letterbox in a vertical way? Sure. We could just go in here to our slide options and we could change the effects, change our masking layer. Instead of having our zoom X be 50 or 100 by 50, we could do 50 by 100. 50 by 100. And so then it creates a vertical shape instead, which we would have to change the motion of our image, since now we can see the edge of our image. But yeah, you can skew whichever way you want. And change that back real quick, because that doesn't quite look right. But once you break those constraints, you can adjust your zoom X and zoom Y values whichever way you want. Alexander asked where the name alpha came from. Alpha has to do with working with transparency. My technical knowledge of where alpha comes is fairly limited, but I know it's used in lots of other programs. You can do alpha layers in Photoshop, in video editing programs. You can create alpha transparency, stuff like that. So the actual history of all of that I'm not quite sure about, Alexandra. I'm not going to be able to give you the exact best answer. Karen asks, where is the media built-in content folder you mentioned? Alright, so when you open up ProShow, it should look something like this on the left. It should say desktop, media sources, my computer, my documents, my pictures network. That's by default what it's going to look like. So double click on media sources. Now see, I have purchased some of the media source content, or I've got some of it installed on my computer. Media source is royalty-free content from Photodex. So you should have, by default, ProShow Producer built-in content. And you should be able to expand that and see that if you don't have a masks area here in your built-in content, you can simply go to File, Download Extras, and then choose Download Extras again. And that's going to connect you to the Photodex website, and you can download all of these free extras. So you'll just select masks and hit install if those aren't already included. And there's all sorts of other free stuff that you can download from us as well. Sure, you're welcome, Karen. Okay. Alexandra said opacity in grayscale and alpha. I'm not quite sure what you're asking there. Let me move on to your next question if you want to retype that one. Alexandra asks, exercise number 1, first layer with mask, second layer without. What will happen if second layer will have mask 2? Well, I mean, it depends on what type of mask you apply. We applied the mask to the top layer, to the flower, because we didn't want to see the edge of the flower. Does that make sense? So if we go in to our layers category and we turn off this mask, see what it looks like? We see the edge of the flower. If I click OK, we see the edge of the flower. So what we want to do is we want to conceal that left edge of the flower. That's why we applied the mask. Sorry about that. So when I turn that mask back on, the edge of the flower is concealed so that we're able to kind of blend the two images together. In the first example, you wouldn't have to apply a mask to the second layer because, well, I don't see why you would need one. You could apply a mask to the second layer if you didn't want to see a certain portion of it. But in this case, I don't think you really have to. So Alexandra also asked, in example 1, is there a difference which layer is masked and which without? I mean, in example 1, I would want to mask the flower because the flower is the top layer. It's the flower that is causing the problem without the gradient because the flower is too imposing on top of the background. So that's why we applied the gradient mask to the flower so that the flower can kind of blend in with the layer underneath it so that we're able to see both at the same time. Now because if the leaf layer were on top of the flower, all right, if our layer order was changed, then we would want to apply the mask to the leaf instead of the flower. Because the leaf is the one that would be on top of the flower. And probably we would want to conceal the right side of the leaves. So it matters which one is being imposing. Which one do you want to conceal? That's which one you apply the mask to. All right, Alexandra, how about PSD file with some transparency to use for alpha? Absolutely, you can do that. In yesterday's class, we used Intro to Keyframes. This is a mask, or excuse me, a leaf with a PSD file. So I could take, say, this autumn scene image and drag and drop it into our slide. And maybe I go in and make sure that it fills up the entire frame. And let's say I want to add a masking layer, but I'm going to add an image. And I will use my Intro to Keyframes class. I'm going to use the leaf image. Now take a look on the left. It automatically applies it as an alpha transparency mask. You can see, so this is what it looks like as an alpha transparency mask. Only where there is a pixel on the leaf does the background show through. So you can absolutely use PSD files with transparency. That is what that leaf is. All right, Sandra, is there an explanation of alpha channel? Oh, excuse me, is this an explanation of alpha channel? All the red area is transparent. You see the image. When you adjust the size of the red, you turn off the pixels everywhere. There is no red. Somewhat. All of the red area, I mean, it's kind of transparent because it reveals the layer underneath. Anywhere where there is no red, you can't see the layer underneath. I am cautious of explaining it that way, Sandra, because I don't want to say that it's transparent because alpha channel works with pixels. So you don't want to call an actual pixel area transparent. I would say when you want to work with alpha masks, anywhere where there is a pixel, which In the case when we're using a solid color as an alpha mask, anywhere where it's red, you can see the layer underneath. Anywhere where it's not red, you will not be able to see the layer underneath. So when you're working with masks, you want to just consider the layer that's directly underneath that. And anywhere where the layer underneath isn't showing through, any underlying layers or the background is going to show through. All right. Okay, Alexander said I was masking both layers, making it too complicated for me. Good, so maybe that helps just a little bit. You only need to mask one layer. Alexander asked, what will happen if some less than 100% opacity what will happen if some opacity in grayscale and alpha is used? I'm not quite sure what you're asking. I'm not quite sure what you're asking in that one, Alexander. What will happen if some opacity in grayscale and alpha is used? It's going to work differently in each one of them. If there's some transparency, opacity, and masking, we're using opacity and masking in this example. That's what, when you're working with opacity, whether there's pixels or no pixels, you're working with alpha masks. When you're working with grayscale masks, there's no need to work with transparency. You're going to want to work with light and dark values. You're working with two different kinds. If you want to work with opacity, work with alpha mask. If you want to work with light and dark values, work with grayscale. Thanks, Anne. We're actually about 5 minutes over time, guys. I apologize if you're not quite understanding. But our support team's really great. Take a look at the video, watch it over again, read over your notes, and take a look at what exactly it is that we've been doing. Think about it. Try the examples that we created today in your own time. And I think once you start to see actually how it works, it's going to help quite a bit. And Karen, I do see that your hand's up. And I'm very sorry that we just don't quite have time to get to it. So if you guys still have questions, feel free to contact our support team. You can email them with any sort of question that you've got, support@photodex.com. I'll send that to all of you. You can also send it to, you can also give them a call. Let me see, I've got my email website up. Go to photodex.com, take a look in the upper right-hand corner, click on Contact Us. You can call our customer service team. They're here 8 to 8 Central Time. There's a direct phone line, a local phone line. There's also a toll-free number, or you can email them directly from the website. There's also quite a bit of how-tos and stuff like that. So you can see here there's a using masks in ProShow Producer. So we're right here. I clicked on support. I went to manuals and how-to. So you can look at using a gradient layer as a mask if you want. It'll show you how to do that. It'll show you how to use masks in ProShow Producer. So there's some examples of things that you can do there if you want. Also, go into your sharing section. Take a look at product demo shows. Watch the masking show. It's pretty cool. So give that masking show a look. And it has some good ideas and maybe give you a different way of looking at how to use masks. All right, so thanks so much, guys, for coming, and hope to see you in future classes. You guys have a great day. We'll see you next time.